A sheet of ice, impossibly thin, creeps across the inside of the cockpit canopy, obscuring the world outside, 2,500 feet above the English countryside. The 29th of January, 1943. The air is a maelstrom of freezing rain and slate-gray cloud. Inside the cockpit of a brand-new Avro Lancaster heavy bomber, First Officer Lettice Curtis has been flying on instruments for the last 40 minutes. Her airspeed is 150 knots, sluggish and heavy. Her fuel gauges are nearing empty. The 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines are humming, but the port outer has been running rough for the last 20 minutes, a subtle vibration felt through the rudder pedals. She is alone. Her task is to deliver this 30-ton war machine from the factory where it was built to an active RAF bomber squadron. She has less than an hour of flight time in this specific aircraft type. The runway at her destination is a grass strip, barely visible through the driving rain, and a vicious crosswind is attempting to tear the aircraft from her control. There is no option to divert. There is no co-pilot to help. This is not combat. This is a delivery, and it is one of the most dangerous jobs in the war. These stories of quiet, relentless competence, of battles fought against physics and weather, are a vital part of our history. If you agree, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support is what allows this work to continue. I also want to hear from you. Whether you are a pilot, an engineer, or a student of history, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today. This is a community, and every voice matters. By 1940, Great Britain stands alone. The Battle of Britain has been won in the skies over Kent and Sussex, but the victory is a fragile one. The war is now a global conflict, a war of production, logistics, and attrition. The Royal Air Force is expanding at an unprecedented rate. Factories across the country are working around the clock, producing thousands of new Spitfires, Hurricanes, Wellingtons, and soon the great 4-engine heavy bombers. But this industrial miracle has created a critical bottleneck. A new Spitfire built in a factory at Castle Bromwich is useless until it is delivered to a frontline squadron at Biggin Hill. A battle-damaged Lancaster, repaired at a maintenance unit in Scotland, cannot contribute to the bomber offensive until it is returned to its base in Lincolnshire. The task of moving these aircraft falls to RAF pilots, but every combat-trained pilot is a priceless national asset, desperately needed at the front to fight the Luftwaffe. To use these men as a delivery service is a catastrophic waste of a finite resource. The solution, born of necessity, is the Air Transport Auxiliary, or ATA. Formed in 1939, it is initially a small, all-male organization, a collection of older, more experienced civilian pilots or those medically unfit for combat duty. Their mission, stated with stark simplicity, is to ferry aircraft from anything to anywhere within the United Kingdom. Their motto, Iteris Aviti, eager for the air. The demand is overwhelming. As the war intensifies, as aircraft production soars, the ATA needs more pilots. The pool of available men is quickly exhausted. An obvious, but at the time, radical solution presents itself. There are women in Britain with pilot's licenses, many with hundreds of hours of flying experience. In 1940, Pauline Gower, herself a skilled pilot with a commercial license, is given the authority to form a women's section of the ATA. The institutional prejudice is immense. The popular belief, even within the RAF, is that women lack the physical strength, the mechanical aptitude, and the emotional temperament to handle high-performance military aircraft. The first 8 female pilots are recruited in 1940. They are pioneers subjected to intense scrutiny. Initially, they are restricted to flying only light, single-engine trainer aircraft, like the de Havilland Tiger Moth. But their competence is undeniable. They deliver their aircraft flawlessly, often in appalling weather conditions that keep their male counterparts on the ground. Slowly, grudgingly, the restrictions are lifted. The women prove they can handle the advanced trainers, then the powerful single-engine fighters. They master the Hawker Hurricane, then the legendary Supermarine Spitfire. Then they move to twin-engine aircraft, the Bristol Blenheim, the Wellington bomber. Finally, they are cleared for the heaviest and most complex machines in the RAF inventory, the four-engine heavy bombers, the Short Stirling, the Handley Page Halifax, and the Avro Lancaster. By the end of the war, a female ATA pilot will be expected to be able to fly any aircraft in the British or American inventory, from the smallest trainer to the largest bomber, with nothing more than a small book of notes. They are not combat pilots. They are masters of 1,000 different machines. Lettuce. Curtis was the archetypal ATA pilot. She was not a daredevil. She was a mathematician. An Oxford graduate with a degree in mathematics, she was a woman of quiet intellect and fierce determination. She had learned to fly before the war, falling in love with the precision and freedom of aviation. When the call came for women to join the ATA, she was among the first to volunteer. Her background set her apart. She approached flying not as an art, but as a science. She understood the physics of flight, the mechanics of the engine, the geometry of navigation. She was not a natural pilot in the sense of flying by feel. She was a procedural pilot, a technician of the air. Her logbook was a testament to her meticulous nature. This analytical mind was perfectly suited to the unique challenge of the ATA. The core of the ATA pilot's skill set was not dogfighting, but adaptation. A combat pilot might spend his entire career mastering a single aircraft type. An ATA pilot had to be a master of them all. The tool that made this possible was a small, pocket-sized book officially titled Ferry Pilot's Notes. This was the Bible of the ATA. For every one of the 107 different aircraft types an ATA pilot might be called upon to fly, there was a page in this book. It contained the distilled, critical information needed to safely operate the aircraft: takeoff speeds, landing speeds, engine limitations, fuel system layout, and emergency procedures. It was a masterpiece of information design, a checklist for survival. Lettuce Curtis's training was a steady progression through the ATA's aircraft classification system. She began, like all women, in Class 1, flying the simple Tiger Moths. Having proven her competence, she moved to Class 2, the operational single-engine fighters. The first time she sat in the cockpit of a Spitfire would have been an intimidating experience. The aircraft was a weapon, built for speed and aggression. Her briefing would have been minimal. A senior pilot would have walked her through the cockpit layout, pointed out the critical controls, and then handed her the ferry pilot's notes. Her first flight was her final exam. She mastered it. From the fighters, she progressed to Class 3, light twin-engine aircraft, then Class 4, the operational twin-engine bombers like the Mosquito and the Wellington. Finally, she was cleared for Class 5, the four-engine heavy bombers. This was the pinnacle. To be a woman in the 1940s, entrusted with command of a 30-ton four-engine bomber, was an almost revolutionary act. She had proven, through sheer undeniable competence, that she was the equal of any pilot of any gender. Her daily life was one of constant intellectual and physical challenge. She was not just a pilot, she was a logician, a navigator, and a mechanic, solving a new set of problems with every flight. The enemy, for an ATA pilot, was not a Messerschmitt or a Focke-Wulf. It was a combination of three relentless, unforgiving forces: the British weather, the fallibility of machinery, and the chaos of wartime logistics. A typical day for Lettuce Curtis would begin at dawn at a ferry pool, a central base from which pilots were dispatched. There was no fixed schedule. A list of delivery jobs would arrive via telex. An Anson trainer needed moving from Hull to Bristol. A repaired Hurricane needed to be returned to its squadron in Duxford. A brand-new Lancaster, fresh off the factory line, needed to be flown from Woodford to its Bomber Command base in Lincolnshire. Curtis might be assigned the Lancaster. The briefing would be Spartan. She would be given a map, a weather forecast that was often hours out of date, and a delivery chit. The aircraft, parked on the airfield, was a stranger to her. She had never flown this specific Lancaster before. Her first act was a meticulous pre-flight inspection, a walk around, checking control surfaces, tires, and looking for any signs of fuel or oil leaks. This was a brand new machine. It had been assembled by a workforce under immense pressure. Mistakes happened. Once in the cockpit, the ferry pilot's notes would come out. She would spend 10 minutes methodically refamiliarizing herself with the layout. Fuel cock positions, hydraulic controls, emergency procedures. Her mind, the mind of a mathematician, would build a systems diagram of the aircraft. She would start the 4 Merlin engines, the sound a deafening roar. Her takeoff, alone in the vast cockpit designed for a crew of 7, would be a moment of intense concentration. Once airborne, the next challenge began: navigation. The ATA flew almost exclusively by contact or visual flight rules, with radio silence strictly enforced to avoid giving navigational aid to German intruders. She would navigate by following railway lines, rivers, and roads, her map spread on her knees. This was a visual, intensely focused kind of flying, requiring constant cross-referencing between the landscape below and the chart. Her greatest adversary was the weather. A clear sky could, in a matter of minutes, become a solid wall of cloud, a blanket of fog. A pilot caught on top, above a solid layer of cloud with no radio navigation aids, was in mortal danger. They were trained to trust their compass, to fly a timed heading, and to pray for a break in the clouds that would reveal a recognizable landmark. The journey was a solitary one. Hours spent in the vibrating cockpit, the roar of the engines a constant companion. Then, upon reaching the destination, the final challenge, the landing. She would be landing a heavy bomber at an active, often crowded, operational airfield she might never have seen before. After delivering the Lancaster, her day was not over. Her next task was to get back to the ferry pool or on to the next job. This was a logistical scramble. She might hitch a ride in the back of an Anson air taxi, flown by another ATA pilot, or she might take a series of trains across the country. There was no glamour in this. It was cold, tiring, and frustrating. Arriving at another airfield, she might be assigned her next delivery. Perhaps this time it is a Spitfire. She now had to completely reconfigure her mind. The heavy, stable handling of the Lancaster had to be forgotten. She now had to think like a fighter pilot. The Spitfire was light, sensitive, a thoroughbred. The cockpit was cramped. The procedures were different. This mental agility, this ability to switch from one complex system to another, was the defining genius of the ATA pilot. On this second flight, she might encounter a new problem, a flicker of a warning light. The oil pressure on the Merlin engine starting to drop. She is over the industrial Midlands, the sky thick with smog. The weather is closing in. She now has to work the problem. The ferry pilot's notes come out again. She runs through the emergency checklist. Is it a faulty gauge or a real leak? She makes a decision. She cannot risk continuing to her destination. She diverts to the nearest available airfield, a grass strip she can barely make out through the haze. The landing is tense. She has only one chance. She brings the fighter in, touching down smoothly, and rolls to a stop. She has saved a valuable aircraft. She climbs out, finds a telephone, and reports the diversion to her base. Her day is over. 2 aircraft delivered, 1 emergency handled, all in a day's work. When an ATA pilot landed at an RAF base, the reaction from the young combat pilots was often one of initial disbelief, followed by a profound and lasting respect. To see a lone woman climb out of the cockpit of a Spitfire, or even more shockingly, a 4-engine Lancaster, was a sight that shattered preconceptions. The ATA pilots earned their reputation not with words, but with their quiet, daily demonstration of impeccable airmanship. The system that supported them was one of paperwork and procedure. For every aircraft delivered, a chit was signed. Lettice Curtis's logbook, at the end of a long day, would be a simple factual record of her work. An entry might read, Avro Lancaster Mackay-3 ND475 from AV Row & Co., Woodford to RAF Waddington. 1 hour, 15 minutes. Supermarine Spitfire Mackay 14th RM787 from Heston Aircraft to RAF Lympne. 40 minutes. There would be no mention of the bad weather, the rough-running engine, or the near miss with a hillside in the fog. The verification of their success was in the numbers. In 1943 alone, the ATA moved over 70,000 aircraft. By the end of the war, the total was over 309,000. This was a logistical feat that was absolutely critical to the Allied war effort. Without the ATA, the frontline squadrons would have been starved of replacement aircraft. The accident rate, given the conditions and the complexity of the task, was remarkably low. But the work was not without cost. 173 ATA pilots were killed in service. 15 of them were women. These were not combat deaths, but they were deaths in the line of duty. Women like the famous aviator Amy Johnson, who bailed out of a stricken airspeed Oxford over the Thames estuary and was lost, or Marion Wilberforce, whose logbook, like Curtis's, was a litany of every major aircraft type flown by the RAF. These women were not statistics. They were highly skilled professionals who paid the ultimate price. Their deaths were a stark reminder of the daily, mundane dangers of their work. A simple engine failure, a sudden patch of fog, a miscalculation in fuel, any could be fatal. The debriefing after a flight with an incident would be a technical affair. An engine that ran rough would be reported to the maintenance officer. The details of a faulty instrument would be noted. This data was fed back into the system, helping engineers identify recurring problems. The ATA pilots were not just delivery drivers, they were the final, critical link in the quality control chain. The long-term impact of the Air Transport Auxiliary was profound. Tactically, their contribution was immediate and decisive. By ferrying hundreds of thousands of aircraft, they freed up thousands of combat-trained pilots to fight the enemy. They were a force multiplier. Every ATA pilot on a delivery run meant another RAF pilot could be on patrol over the Channel or escorting bombers to Berlin. The logistical chain that supplied the frontline squadrons, from the Battle of Britain to D-Day and beyond, would have been fatally weakened without them. The creation of the ferry pilot's notes was a legacy in itself. This system of condensing the vital operational data for a multitude of complex machines into a single, accessible format was a revolution in human factors engineering. It was a precursor to the modern Quick Reference Handbook, or QRH, that is a standard feature in the cockpit of every airliner and military aircraft in the world today. It was a procedural solution to a problem of immense cognitive load, and it worked. But the most enduring legacy of the women of the ATA was social and cultural. They were the visible, undeniable proof that women could fly any aircraft, under any conditions, with a skill and professionalism equal to any man. They did not ask for special treatment. They simply did the job, and they did it superlatively well. They were the first women in British history to be paid the same as their male colleagues for the same work, a landmark achievement secured by their formidable leader, Pauline Gower. When the war ended, many of these women found that the doors that had been opened by necessity were quickly closed again. Airlines and air forces returned to being male-only preserves. But the precedent had been set. The logbooks of women like Lettice Curtis, who had flown 1,470 new aircraft of 94 different types, were an irrefutable testament to their capability. They had not just delivered airplanes, they had delivered a powerful message about equality and competence that would resonate for decades to come, inspiring future generations of women to take their rightful place in the cockpit. The old ferry pools, places like White Waltham and Hamble, are quiet now. The grass airfields are still there, home to flying clubs and private aircraft. The roar of 1,000 Merlin engines has been replaced by the gentle drone of a Cessna. The war is a distant memory. The women of the ATA have, for the most part, passed into history. Their stories often overlooked in the grand narratives of combat and strategy. But their contribution was as vital as any squadron of fighters. They were the quiet gears in the great machine of the air war. Their story is not one of heroic dogfights or daring raids. It is a story of a different kind of courage. It is the courage of daily, unrelenting professionalism. It is the courage to climb into the cockpit of a 30-ton bomber, alone, in a storm, and trust in your own skill and training. It is a story of competence as a form of valor. Lettice Curtis survived the war and continued her career in aviation and engineering, a quiet testament to a life defined by intellect and skill. The aircraft she and her colleagues flew are now priceless museum pieces, but the sky they flew in remains. Their story is a reminder that some of the most critical battles of the war were won not against a human enemy, but against the unforgiving challenges of mechanics, weather, and logistics, by a small group of extraordinary women who simply and superbly delivered.